One of the many things in One Piece that interests me is sword lore, and in that group at the top would be the technique I'll be explaining in this video, the breath of all things. This technique or power first debuted in Zoro's fight with Mr. One, and it was the power that allowed him to break his limits by cutting steel, something Zoro hadn't been able to do up until this point in the story. However, this wouldn't be the last we hear about it, as it was indirectly talked about in Wano and its connections to Haki. But before we talk about that, let's start with Koushiro's explanation of the breath of all things. Koushiro tells Zoro that there are swordsmen that are able to not cut anything, and those same swordsmen can cut steel. The ability to cut anything and the ability to not cut anything is the pinnacle of swordsmanship. This alone actually tells us quite a lot, but it's not until we see it against Mr. One that we have a much better understanding. But before that, I want to track back to Mihawk in the Baratie arc. Mihawk deflects bullets that are fired at him, to which Zoro says that he has never seen such subtle swordplay. Mihawk tells Zoro that without subtlety, a sword is just an iron bar. When Zoro fights Mihawk, Mihawk says that Zoro has heavy-handed swordsmanship. That right there was Zoro's main flaw and was the reason he wasn't able to cut steel, a lack of subtlety. Mihawk's words are similar to Koushiro's, where he says that a blade that injures all it touches isn't really a sword. The pinnacle of swordsmanship isn't about force and overwhelming strength, it's about the intent behind attacks, freely cutting what one desires. Now let's talk about Haki. Believe it or not, Zoro used Haki against Mr. One, and I know that's weird because Haki wasn't a fully established concept by the Alabasta arc, but in chapter 939, Hyogoro told Luffy that there are swordsmen of Wano that use Haki, also called Ryo, an invisible power that stems from the body and is infused with the blade. Hyogoro continues saying that a good katana will cut through steel and will not cut a sheet of paper if that's your wish. It's all according to the desire of the swordsman. Now at this point, I would have expected you to have made the connection to Koushiro's explanation and demonstration of the breath of all things. The keywords here are desire and wish. Like I said earlier, the pinnacle of swordsmanship isn't about force and overwhelming strength, it's about the intent behind attacks, freely cutting what one desires. Koushiro's demonstration is one example. Another is Mihawk sending a slash aimed for Luffy but was blocked by Mr. One. Does that mean Mihawk isn't able to cut steel? Of course not. The reason he didn't was because his attack didn't match the breath of steel. In other words, Mihawk never intended to cut steel in the first place, but as soon as he intended to cut steel, Mihawk cut Mr. One with no difficulty whatsoever. A bigger moment which a lot of misconceptions have come from is Mihawk's sword slash aimed at Whitebeard that was blocked by Diamond Jozu. That slash never cut Jozu because Mihawk never intended to cut Diamond in the first place, so to Jozu it became a blunt attack that he could withstand without being hurt. It also shouldn't come as no surprise that Jozu is able to withstand a blunt attack from Mihawk, as not only does his Devil Fruit make him one of the most durable characters in One Piece, but he's also extremely powerful, being able to stall Aokiji, a Navy Admiral. The breath of all things isn't regular armor Haki like the invisible armor or hardening which is used to make blades more durable, but it's a unique technique used by high-level swordsmen. We've been introduced to advanced techniques of armor Haki before we even knew it was connected to Haki at all, like Rayleigh breaking his cuffs in the auction house and Sentomaru blocking Luffy without touching him. So the breath of all things can still be a Haki technique even though it hasn't been stated to be one yet. I'm hoping we get a callback to the breath of all things in Zoro's mid-battle flashback during the Wano arc, showing his training with Mihawk, because honestly there is no way it wasn't a big part of Zoro's training. After all, it is the pinnacle of swordsmanship. Zoro even says there's nothing he can't cut when he's cooking up his ritual performing 3000 worlds, so I can only assume it was crucial. During the Mr. One fight, Zoro learned what the breath of all things is. He entered a state when all around him became silent and he was between life and death. In that moment, he was able to hear the breath of steel, convey his will to the blade, allowing him to cut through Mr. One as he desired. This perfectly fits Hyogoro's explanation of how swordsmen of Wano use Haki. Haki's literal meaning is ambition or willpower, so Zoro's blade, understanding his will, is infusing Haki into his blade, which makes perfect sense. Prior to cutting Mr. One, Zoro slashed at leaves which didn't cut. just like Koushiro didn't cut paper, and the next moment he was able to cut a rock. Just like Hyogoro said, it's all according to the desire of the swordsman which Zoro displayed. A counter argument to the breath of all things being related to arm and haki would be Zoro was unable to cut NL, therefore he didn't learn armament haki against Mr. 1. Here's the thing though, he never necessarily learned armament haki, he only awakened it, but he couldn't freely use it at will. After the battles of Alabasta, Zoro was training in order to be able to use that power which we know now to be Haki at any time. He was specifically training his concentration so he could enter that state of being able to hear the breath of all things, which would allow him to convey his will to cut nothing or anything to his blade. You wouldn't expect Zoro to master the Pinnacle of Swordsmanship from one experience after all. Just like how Luffy, he awakened his Conqueror's Haki against Duval's Bull Motobaro, used it a couple times unconsciously after awakening it, but he couldn't use it at will until after his training during the time skip. Now, let's revise the NL situation. After NL had struck Robin with lightning, Zoro was consumed by rage and charged at NL. In this state of mind, Zoro wouldn't be able to tap into the breath of all things as he had lost mental concentration and the calmness like he displayed against Mr. 1. Therefore, he could never have cut NL even if he tried his hardest. It's not until we see Zoro against Kuma that we see Haki used again. When Kuma was about to kill Luffy, Zoro dashed in and cut Kuma's shoulder. Remember, Kuma became a pacifista, so his body was made of metal, and Zoro even said it was harder than iron. In these circumstances, it makes perfect sense that Zoro was able to tap into that power. He was on the brink of death just like against Mr. 1, his captain's life was on the line. At this moment, Zoro was focused, he had one desire, cut Kuma to save his captain. His sword understood his will and he was successful. So, the breath of all things is a variant of armament haki, but I don't think it's the only haki used in this state. Honestly, the next bit is a sprinkle of my own headcanon, but please stay open-minded. There isn't direct connections to it like Hyogoro's statement, but I'll be forming my argument based on yet again Zoro's fight with Mr. 1, and I'll be highlighting the parts that support this. Mr. 1 intended to finish off Zoro by burying him under the rubble of the pillar he sliced up. However, none of the rocks hit Zoro. Mr. 1 asked Zoro how he was able to dodge all those rocks. Zoro said he never dodged them, he knew where the rocks wouldn't fall. He also knew that his sword was under that specific rock. I think it's clear at this point that I'm claiming that Zoro also awakened Observation Haki. Observation Haki has many techniques revolved around sensing, that being intent sensing, which is mantra, presence, strength and emotion sensing. However, Observation Haki can only be used on living things, so Zoro shouldn't be able to sense the intent of fallen rocks, right? Some people would go as far as to say that Zoro used future sight in this moment, having a mental image of where the stones would fall. I'm not of this belief though, as it's pretty much debunked by the fact that Zoro could actually feel something alive in the rocks, that being its breathing, and that's what he was reacting to. The trees had a heartbeat of their own, and so did the soil itself, meaning when using the breath of all things, even non-living things can be sensed. The breath of all things uses a variant of Observation Haki that extends to non-living things. Zoro was able to sense the intent of fallen rocks through its breathing, and was able to sense the presence of his sword under that specific rock also through its breathing. I'm pretty confident that a form of Observation Haki is most definitely in use, but feel free to challenge me on that if you don't agree yourself. Essentially, the breath of all things is a technique using both Observation Haki and Armament Haki used in tandem. Hearing the breathing of things is the use of Observation Haki, and cutting what you want and do not want is the use of Armament Haki. This shouldn't be very surprising or a reach at all, considering the fact that this is also known as the Pinnacle of Swordsmanship. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section below. Do you now think that this state is connected to Haki? If you don't, let me know why. Be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already, it would be much appreciated. Link to my Twitter in the description for updates on future videos, and until next time.
Atomic Sparta!